I'm here with Phil Hill, market analyst at MindWires and publisher of the blog PhilonEdTech. Phil Hill, welcome to BbWorld.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation and to the full event.
So let's get going on that conversation. You've written about the different phases that institutions are going through in response to COVID. Which phase do you think institutions will be in heading into the fall 2020-2021 academic semester?
Well, it's interesting because when I first wrote that back in March of 2020, things were just happening. And the whole concept was around that there will be different phases in our reaction to the pandemic. And one thing that happened is the vast majority of education, higher ed and K-12, was going through the same rapid transition at the same time, late February through mid-April, roughly. Everybody was trying to figure out how to get online and how to survive. As we've gone through the other phases, such as trying to bring back in the basics that we already know about for quality online education, and sort of this unknown period of are we online, are we face-to-face, do we have to go back and forth? There was a lot of schools really in the same situation. Now, I think it's changing. So now that we're into what I would argue in the US, we're into phase 4 because most schools are now trying to figure out what is the new normal and how do we deal with it. So US higher education, we're dealing with international student issues. Are these students going to be able to come back into the country on time for the semester? Are they going to get financial aid if it's partially remote? We're dealing with questions such as how much of the infrastructure we put in place over the last 18 months do we keep in place? And so you're dealing with that. And then eventually, I think by the middle of 2022, we'll really be into phase 4B, which is figuring out what is our new normal moving forward. But what's interesting is I don't think that's true in other regions. So the UK is very much still in a lockdown situation or coming out of it, hopefully by the time of the event. And so they're in a different situation. Developing world, there's a lot of other places that are different as well. So we're in different locations is the quick answer. But in US, I think we're 4A, if you will, and then starting to define a new normal.
Building off of that, you recently spoke on the increasing importance of video platform in education. What role do you think the video platform will play going forward?
I probably should mention, I've gotten some pushback on that or some surprise. Not everybody had really thought about this in the same situation. But video has become, whether it was intended or not, mentally almost the default definition of a learning platform as we went into remote education. So if you ask a lot of students when they're saying, hey, I have class Tuesday, what they really mean is they're going to be on some synchronous video platform. Likewise, from the teachers, instructors, faculty, there's so many of them who just did remote and online learning for the first time. Well, now that they've survived and they've gotten through it, their mental definition of what online learning is heavily based on video. It's got good aspects to it, it's got bad aspects to it, but I don't think we're going backwards. I think that people have latched onto this idea that video is a key part of the equation, and it wasn't just a temporary measure. And I've even seen this from experienced online programs where they've added video to the mix of something that used to be primarily or only through an LMS or only asynchronous. And we've learned that there are some real possibilities for student engagement, for connections, for being able to explain things that you can do with video that are now accepted as a part of the stack. So I don't think we're going backwards. It's not a panacea, but it's real and it's here to stay.
So we're not going backwards. What are the implications for the LMS considering that?
Well, despite what I think a lot of people have been talking about for at least 15 years, if not more, I don't think the LMS is dead. I don't think the LMS is a commodity. And if you actually look at the data of usage, the LMS actually became more important at the same time that the video platform was rising in prominence. So what we didn't see was a displacement. I don't think this is video displacing the LMS, but both of them had to increase in importance. It's just that the LMS had a lot, it didn't have as far to go to become so mainstream. So I think that the LMS will continue rising in importance. And what we have to figure out is, what does that mean? How do these work together in hopefully more of a seamless environment for students, particularly in K-12? K-12 students are going to be a lot less likely to be able to shift between applications. So we need to deal with the seamless presentation and figure out what that looks like moving forward.
On that same note, or talking about the student experience too, how did the pandemic and the subsequent pivot online change students' expectations for the delivery of coursework, but also support? And do you think those expectations are here to stay, likely to change?
If you look at the data, we were in a situation before the pandemic where nearly 2 in 5 U.S. higher education students taking at least one online course. Well, now, of course, the answer is well over 90%. So that means a lot of students got their first experience with online digital education in some form or another during the pandemic. And one of the aspects of it, by necessity, you needed to get quite a bit more into 24/7 support. And a lot of schools were figuring out, how do we reach out to students and figure where they are? And these are aspects of support that I think students are going to want to maintain, even when, and for the majority who are going to go back to face-to-face or hybrid education. I think they're going to have an expanded view that support can't just be this help desk that's only open until 6 p.m. on weekdays. I think they're going to need, beyond that, they're going to need to have something that's more proactive, reaching out saying, hey, we noticed that you're not active in a class or you're having a problem. How are you doing? So proactive, expanded support, I think, is going to be a continued expectation moving forward, regardless of whether a student is fully online or not.
Support that works for students and more proactivity, that makes sense. And what surprised you over the past year about how institutions have reacted to the pandemic?
Well, I don't know if this is a reaction or just how things happen. If you look at the massive scale of change that happened in K-12 and higher education worldwide in a matter of weeks going online, and for a lot of situations for schools that had never really come up with an online strategy, you have to admit that it's remarkable how few disasters we've had. There are only a handful of cases, well, more than a handful, but only a limited number of cases where you've had school being unavailable for a week or more. And quite honestly, I'm surprised there wasn't more of it given the scope of the change. So I guess you could mark that as I'm pleasantly surprised with how resilient the system was and how well we adapted in such a quick manner, and therefore how few disasters we have. That surprised me, but in a very good way.
It's definitely a testament to the community and the work that they put in to make a transition of that scale happen so seamlessly.
Exactly. And this is especially, it's ironic, if you will, given how many times you've heard the story, education hasn't changed in hundreds of years, there's no adaptability. Well, we've seen there's real adaptability in the system. We have flaws, we need lots of improvements, but we just demonstrated how well the system could hold up. And that surprised me, just how well we did.
Phil Hill, we could have this conversation all day. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of BbWorld.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.